The night my brother announced baby 5, the celebration became my sentencing. My mother smiled and assigned me as their unpaid caretaker without a single question. I stood in the corner clutching a flimsy plate, and the second I heard her say, "You'll manage the little ones," I knew the pattern would never end unless I snapped it. Everyone toasted his growing family. My father actually pumped his fist. To them, fertility was heroism and my childless, unmarried existence was a blank schedule waiting to be filled. Then Mom locked eyes with me and delivered the line like a solved puzzle. "You'll take the children, obviously." Not a request, not a discussion, a decree. I set down my plate. "Absolutely not." Ice clinked inside someone's glass, that was the only sound. My sister-in-law laughed with a cruel edge. "You have no real family, consider this your practice." Something hardened in my chest. I didn't scream. I didn't defend my worth to people who had already filed it as empty. I grabbed my bag, walked past their frozen faces and drove off. The next morning, while I was still convincing myself they'd regain their senses, my phone lit up with an unknown caller. "Ma'am, this is Officer Daniels. 3 children have been left at the community centre with a note claiming you agreed to take custody for today." Before I reveal what happened after that call, pause with me. What hour are you living in right now, and what does the sky look like where you are? I'm always amazed how far these stories travel. To understand why that officer's voice shattered something inside me, you need the backstory. This was never a one-time ambush. My family had long treated my life like free storage. My brother Ryan, his wife Jessica, and our mother Karen, a woman who dressed manipulation as tradition, had perfected the art of turning my availability into obligation. Dad, Michael, simply stayed silent until quietude became endorsement. Ryan and Jessica already had 4 kids, Ella, Oliver, Lily, and little Mason. I adored them, and that love was precisely the lever my family pulled. When Ella spiked a fever during my finals week, I was labelled selfish for not abandoning work. When Oliver's daycare shut down, Ryan dropped him at my doorstep saying, "You're better at organising anyway." When Lily arrived, my mother broadcast that I'd volunteered for recovery support, which somehow meant I scrubbed dishes, folded laundry, and managed bedtimes while Ryan golfed, because apparently new dads need vacations too. Each time I resisted, they performed hurt. Each time I relented, they called it devotion. So when Ryan made his 5th baby announcement at that barbecue, my body understood the trap before my brain caught up. That infant wasn't just a blessing, it was another lock on the cage they'd built around my choices. I hadn't even reached the highway before my phone buzzed with Mom. "Stop embarrassing the family. Ryan's 'you made Jessica cry', Jessica's 'being alone will haunt you', and Dad's textbook, 'just apologise and move on.'" I ignored every word. The next morning I met my best friend James for coffee, the only soul who refused to weaponize my boundaries. I'd barely sat when he said, "They've drafted you again, haven't they?" I spilled the whole ugly scene. The announcement, my mother's sentence, the training remark, and Dad's proud grin at Ryan, as if producing children qualified him for sainthood, while my adulthood was treated as a waiting area for everyone else's crises. James leaned forward. "Sophie, this isn't assistance, it's ownership." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. Then my phone flashed, Mom again. When I didn't pick up, she texted, "Come fix your attitude before it becomes a real problem." James urged me not to go. People like that don't seek conversation, they seek capitulation. But some naive fragment of me still believed that if I spoke plainly enough, they'd finally recognize me as a human being, not a fallback plan. So I drove to my parents' house. Mom stood in the kitchen swirling iced tea as if she were hosting a luncheon, not an interrogation. Ryan scrolled his phone. Jessica posed against the counter with red-rimmed eyes so polished they looked rehearsed. Dad hovered by the sliding door, mute as always. "We're not demanding much," Mom began. "You didn't ask at all," I replied. Ryan snorted. "Stop with the theatrics, no one said you'd raise them forever." Jessica crossed her arms. "Just through the pregnancy and maybe the newborn phase. You understand how exhausting Barbies are." "That isn't a small favour," I said. "That's a human life." Mom exhaled as if I were a stubborn toddler. "You work remotely 3 days, you rent, you have no husband, no children. What exactly are you guarding so fiercely?" That sentence bruised deeper than a scream. It was the distilled truth of how they saw me. Because my existence didn't mirror theirs, it held lesser value. "I'm guarding myself." Ryan sneered. "From your own blood. From people who only invoke blood when it benefits them." The room chilled. Then my phone shattered the quiet, unknown number. I nearly dismissed it, but instinct told me to answer. "Miss Sophie Morgan, Officer Daniels, Westbrook Community Centre. Are you aware 3 children were dropped off under your name this morning? I stared at Ryan. A muscle twitched near his mouth, barely but enough. Which children? I asked, already certain. The officer explained. A handwritten note claimed I'd agreed to supervise Ella, Oliver, and Lily because their parents were unavailable. Staff grew concerned when no adult completed the proper check-in. Jessica averted her eyes. Ryan muttered, "It's nothing major." And that's when I finally saw the entire scheme. They hadn't just assumed my compliance, they'd engineered a scenario where my refusal would paint me as heartless. I walked out without another syllable because if I'd stayed, the narrative would have shifted to my temper instead of their fraud. Officer Daniels asked if I'd come to the center. I agreed, but I added a sentence I'd never spoken to anyone in authority. I want it documented that I never consented to responsibility for those children. He paused, then said, "Understood, drive carefully." Ryan pursued me onto the porch, voice lowered as if he were doing me a favor. "Don't make this formal," I turned. "You made it formal when you dragged strangers into your deception." He rolled his eyes. "They're your niece and nephews. Then why did you abandon them with a note?" He had no reply. That silence tailed me to the community center. My memory dragged me through years of small thefts. Saturdays sacrificed because Ryan needed just one break. Vacation days surrendered because Jessica feared daycare germs. My mother boasting Sophie adores the kids, while erasing the times I'd sobbed in my parked car, exhausted and invisible. At the front desk, a gentle staff member said, "They're in the activity room. Officer Daniels is with them." I walked a hallway decorated with bright handprints and paper stars, and the cheerfulness made the betrayal feel even grubbier. Ella hugged her own shoulders at a tiny table. Oliver stared blankly at an untouched puzzle. Lily clutched a rabbit that wasn't hers. Mason had been spared, I later learned, only because Jessica decided he was too young for the plot. The instant Ella spotted me, her expression dissolved into relief. "Aunt Sophie," she whispered. I knelt but did not promise false comfort. Children deserve truth wrapped gently, not lies coated in sugar. "I'm here and the adults are going to sort this out." Oliver looked at the officer. "Are we in trouble?" That question almost undid me. "No," I said firmly. "You haven't done anything wrong." Officer Daniels handed me a plastic sleeve holding the note. "Recognize the handwriting?" I knew before I finished scanning. My mother's script. It read, "Sophie Morgan has agreed to watch Ella, Oliver, and Lily until further notice. She is their aunt and has no other obligations. Their parents are preparing for a new baby and require family support. Contact Sophie with any concerns." I read "has no other obligations" 3 times. It felt less like a note and more like a confession. My worth reduced to ink and distributed to strangers. The officer asked, "Did you consent to this arrangement verbally or in writing?" "No. Have you been a caregiver previously?" I exhaled. "I've babysat under pressure, but I've never agreed to ongoing guardianship, emergency authority, or custody for any period." He documented that. "Do you have messages showing refusal?" "Yes." I displayed the texts. "My absolutely not, Mom. Don't embarrass this family, Ryan. You'll cave anyway, Mem and Jessica's. You owe us because we gave you purpose." At that last line, Officer Daniels' expression shifted. He explained the center couldn't transfer responsibility based on a relative's note. Staff had called the police because the children were left near the side entrance before full registration, and the adult didn't complete required paperwork. My family hadn't even possessed the courage to walk inside and speak their lie aloud. "What happens now?" I asked. "The parents will be contacted. If they can't retrieve them promptly, child services may be notified. You aren't compelled to accept responsibility. In fact, if you don't consent, you shouldn't take them home just to smooth things over." I looked at those 3 small faces. My family had wagered my love would overpower my self-preservation. Ella tugged my sleeve. "Mom said you wanted us." I closed my eyes briefly. "I always want you safe, but grown-ups aren't allowed to lie about who's responsible for you." I told Officer Daniels I'd wait while he summoned Ryan and Jessica. Meanwhile, I photographed the note, screenshotted the messages, and captured the visitor log showing the drop-off time. I craved revenge, but not the chaotic, screaming variety. I wanted something precise. I wanted the truth to become undeniable. Truth, not tantrums, dismantles a lie. If you've ever been trapped between shielding a child and shielding yourself, tell me in the comments what choice you'd make, because that question gnawed at me as I sat in that plastic chair waiting for their fiction to collapse. Ryan stormed in first, fury easier than shame. Jessica trailed behind, palm pressed to her stomach though she was hardly showing, wielding the pregnancy as armor before anyone had attacked. Mom entered last, dressed in church attire solely to look virtuous while committing ugly acts. Dad lingered in the parking lot, close enough to appear involved, distant enough to dodge blame. Officer Daniels led them to a side room. I was invited because my name was on the note. Ryan immediately protested. "This is a family misunderstanding." The officer gestured at the note. "Misunderstandings don't typically involve leaving minors at a facility without proper check-in." Jessica's jaw tightened. "They weren't abandoned. Sophie was supposed to come." "I never agreed," I stated. Mom aimed her weaponized disappointment at me. "Sophie, this isn't the moment for stubbornness. 3 children had been abandoned with strangers, police were involved, and somehow my boundary remained the emergency." When the officer asked who wrote the note, silence. Then he faced my mother directly. "Mrs. Morgan," she lifted her chin. "I wrote it because Sophie has always stepped up. The kids feel safe with her." That wasn't the question. Did she agree to be responsible today? Her mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Ryan jumped in. She was being uncooperative, but we knew she'd come around. "So she refused," the officer pressed. "She was emotional," Jessica offered. "That's not a yes," I replied. Ryan glared. "You're really going to humiliate us in front of law enforcement?" "No," I said. "You humiliated yourselves when you left your children at a public center with my name on a lie." For the first time, the awfulness of their action filled the air. Mom reached for her softer weapon. "Sweetheart, no one intended harm. You're so gifted with them. Ryan and Jessica are under tremendous pressure. A 5th baby is a blessing, but it's overwhelming." "Then they should have planned for overwhelming before announcing it like a trophy," I said. Jessica gasped. Ryan stepped closer. The officer quietly ordered him to remain seated. Ryan's face reddened. "You've always been jealous. You can't stand that I have a family and you don't." That false emptiness again, the void they assigned me so they could pack it with labor. I steadied my voice. "No, Ryan, I can't stand that you keep producing children and treating everyone else as your staff." Jessica sobbed. "I'm pregnant. Pregnancy doesn't excuse deceit." Mom slapped the table lightly. "Apologize to your brother and his wife." I turned to the officer. "Please document that I am no emergency contact, caregiver, guardian, or childcare provider unless I grant written consent for a specific date." He nodded. Ryan laughed bitterly. "You're making yourself look cold." I pulled out my phone. "No, I'm making myself clear." I recited the messages aloud. "You'll do it anyway. You owe us purpose. Don't embarrass this family. Come fix your attitude." Jessica tried interrupting. The officer asked her to wait. Mom's expression crumbled as each sentence landed. She'd expected me flustered and guilt-ridden, not armed with evidence. That was my first true taste of power, not revenge as demolition, but revenge as documentation. Officer Daniels stated the children must be retrieved by their parents, the incident would be recorded, and a referral could follow if they repeated leaving minors without confirmed care. Ryan's bravado fractured. "A referral? Seriously? When children are left unsupervised, yes." Jessica began to cry, not for what they'd done to the kids, but because consequences had finally entered the room. My mother whispered, "Sophie, look what you're causing." A year ago, that line would have flattened me. Now, clutching her handwriting in a plastic sleeve and her lies on record, I saw the con. They inflicted harm, then delivered me the shame. "I didn't cause this," I said. "I'm refusing to bury it." Ryan leaned toward me. "If you walk, I'll tell every relative you abandoned the kids." I smiled, and I suspect that chilled him more than yelling. "Then I'll show them the note." Mom stared as if meeting a stranger. Perhaps she was. The old Sophie would have capitulated, ordered pizza, wept in the bathroom, and apologized by Sunday. The woman in that chair had stopped purchasing love with compliance. When the meeting concluded, Ryan and Jessica had to sign their own children out. I hugged Ella, Oliver, and Lily, assuring them my anger wasn't aimed at them. "Are you still our aunt?" Ella whispered. I kissed her hair. "Always, but grown-ups must tell the truth." In the parking lot, Dad approached. For a heartbeat, I imagined an apology. Instead, he said, "You've taken this too far." I looked at him steadily. "No, Dad, I finally stopped carrying it in silence." I drove off as my phone erupted. 23 missed calls, 48 texts, 1 voicemail from Mom opening with "I hope you're proud of yourself." That told me everything. I ignored them all. At my kitchen table, I opened my laptop and composed the most important letter of my existence. No emotion leaked in. Emotion was what they twisted. Facts resisted bending. I wrote, "I, Sophie Morgan, do not consent to be listed, named, implied, or represented as caregiver, guardian, emergency contact, transport provider, or childcare resource for Ryan and Jessica Morgan's children without prior written agreement for a specific date and time. I warned that any further attempt to dump children on me without consent would be reported. I attached screenshots, the note photo, my refusal texts, and emailed it to Ryan, Jessica, Mom, Dad, blind copying myself. then saved everything in a folder titled Family Boundary Documentation. It felt clinical. It also felt like breathing. James answered on the first ring. "Tell me you didn't take them home." "I didn't," he exhaled. "Good, I'm proud of you." That sentence landed clean, no hidden barbs. Over dinner, James helped me build a protocol. Written communication only, no visits to my parents' house without a witness, written confirmation to the community centre that I'd never consented, and if Ryan attacked my reputation, respond once with facts, never arguments. "You don't defeat a manipulation engine by fueling it with emotion," James said. "You unplug it." I ached to believe the storm had passed. It hadn't. 2 days later, cousin Melissa forwarded screenshots from a family group chat I'd muted months ago. Ryan posted, "Sophie abandoned my kids at a community centre because she's bitter about our new baby." Jessica added, "Some women can't bear watching others build families." Mom replied with a prayer emoji, and "We are heartbroken by her choices." Relatives piled on, "Shameful, your grandparents would weep," and a near strangers, "This is why childless people don't grasp sacrifice." My old anger surged, but this time it sharpened into precision. I asked Melissa, "Are they saying I'd agreed to babysit?" She confirmed, "Ryan says you backed out last minute." So I followed James's blueprint. I sent one message to the group chat. For clarity, I never agreed to watch the children. They were left at the community centre with a note falsely stating I'd accepted responsibility. Officer Daniels documented my non-consent. "I won't discuss the children publicly, but I will correct false claims about my involvement." I attached one image. The note, with kids' names partially obscured but my mother's line, has no other obligations, fully visible. 11 glorious minutes of silence. Then Melissa privately messaged, "Oh my God." Aunt Linda deleted her comment. Uncle Paul exited the chat. Mom called immediately. I let it ring. Ryan texted, "Take that down," I answered. "Stop lying," he wrote. "You're humiliating Mom." I replied, "Mom wrote it." That was the second wave of power. The first had been documentation, the second refusing to shield people from the truth in their own penmanship. But the group chat was only the start. Jessica's sister, connected to someone at the community centre, learned an incident report existed. Suddenly the narrative shifted from "Sophie is heartless" to "Why were Ryan and Jessica's children left without proper check-in?" Church friends asked delicate questions. A neighbour recalled my mother's car near the side entrance that morning. Ryan swung from threatening me to begging me to stop. Each time I answered, "I'm not escalating, I'm keeping records." Officer Daniels phoned again, voice serious. "Ms. Morgan, the centre received conflicting statements. Your family now claims you were part of an informal rotation and failed to appear." I almost laughed at the desperation. "That's false. Do you have written refusal prior to the drop-off?" "Yes, several." "Forward them to the case email. We also recommend a written statement." My fingers chilled, not with fear but with clarity. They tried to reframe my refusal as neglect. Now the evidence they'd dismissed was becoming my armor. That night I crafted my statement. Dates, prior incidents, times I was pressured, times I refused, times I helped temporarily, all without exaggeration. The truth alone was weighty enough. I ended with a line I read twice. "Loving children must never be weaponized to manufacture an adult's consent." If that sentence struck you, ask yourself how many times you've called it love when it was really guilt disguised as family duty. The official follow-up meeting convened a week later at the centre, and this time I brought James, not to speak, but to sit beside me as proof that someone stood in my corner without profiting from my silence. Officer Daniels attended alongside Centre Director Ms. Alvarez and a child services intake worker named Renee. Ryan and Jessica straggled in late. Mom appeared brandishing a folder like a legal brief, though it contained only printed photos of me at birthdays and holidays, as if smiling beside children equaled signing away my autonomy. Dad crept into the back row, diminished. Ms. Alvarez opened by explaining the goal was to establish safety protocols and clarify accountability. Ryan pounced. "Exactly, Sophie's framing this as criminal, but it was a mix-up." Renee asked, "Who physically left the children?" No one answered. Ms. Alvarez consulted her notes. A staff member observed Mrs. Sophie Morgan departing the side entrance at 8:12 a.m. without completing intake. Mom stiffened. "I escorted them in." "You did not finalize registration and left before we confirmed an approved adult," Ms. Alvarez corrected. Jessica hissed, "Karen, you said it was handled." Mom shot her a glare, the first crack I'd seen between them. Manipulators thrive when everyone clings to the same lie. Under questioning, their stories splintered. Ryan claimed Jessica was overwhelmed and Mom offered to step in. Jessica claimed Ryan assured her I'd agreed after cooling off. Mom insisted she believed I'd do the right thing because I always had. Dad admitted he knew I'd refused at the barbecue, but figured I'd yield once the children were involved. Renee scribbled every word. Their own testimonies were constructing the case more effectively than I ever could. Mom slid her photo collection across the table. Look at these, Sophie loves them, she's always been involved. Renee glanced at the pictures calmly. Affection for a child does not establish legal responsibility without consent. I wanted to frame that sentence. Ryan rubbed his brow. Jessica's weeping now sounded less theatrical and more genuinely frightened. So what happens? She asked. Renee outlined the requirements: an updated childcare plan, approved emergency contacts with written confirmations, and suspension of centre drop-off privileges until the plan was finalised. Child Services wouldn't remove the children based on this single incident, but the report would remain permanent. A repeat attempt to leave them without confirmed care could escalate into a neglect investigation. Ryan stared at me as though I'd manufactured the consequences. Are you satisfied? I answered truthfully, I'm relieved. Ms. Alvarez asked if I wanted my name stripped from all centre records except as a relative with no pickup authority. Yes, immediately. Jessica's panic surfaced. But what if there's an emergency? I met her eyes. Then you contact someone who actually agreed to be your emergency backup. She whispered, we don't have anyone else. There it was, the unvarnished confession. They'd never crafted a real safety net because I was their entire plan. Renee suggested local childcare resources, parenting workshops, and budgeting assistance for paid care before the baby arrived. Ryan recoiled at paid care, as if strangers merited wages while I deserved eternal obligation. Mom tried once more. Sophie, please, don't splinter this family over paperwork. I turned. Paperwork is the single reason you can no longer lie about me. The meeting closed with signatures, forms, acknowledgements, written restrictions. The revenge wasn't theatrical. It was blue ink on white paper. Ryan and Jessica signed that they understood I was not a caregiver. My mother signed that she possessed no authority to assign me childcare duties. My father signed as a witness, having heard my refusal. Seeing his hand tremble above the pen didn't bring me joy. It saddened me for the younger version of myself, who'd waited decades for him to protect her, only to realize he'd always chosen the comfortable quiet. Near the exit, Jessica stopped me. Did you really need to expose the group chat? Did you really need to tell everyone I abandoned your kids? She lowered her gaze. I was scared. So were they, I said, her face folded because someone at last acknowledged the children had been frightened too. Ryan said you'd cave, she murmured. And your mom said I needed purpose, I replied. I already had purpose, you just refused to honor it. She offered no apology then, but she stopped defending her actions, and that was her first truthful move. Outside, my mother waited by my car. You've changed, she pronounced. I opened the door. No, Mom, I simply stopped converting disrespect into obligation. I drove away with every window down despite the chill, because for the first time in years, I wanted to feel the air move around me without seeking anyone's permission. The consequences arrived in waves, each one stripping away the version of my family that had survived on appearances. First, the community centre mandated a formal childcare plan before the children could return to any programs. That meant listing approved adults, obtaining signatures, settling late fees, and attending a parent accountability session. Ryan groused that bureaucracy was destroying families, but people noticed bureaucracy was merely his word for rules he couldn't charm past. Then Jessica's mother unearthed the whole story. She phoned Jessica, not me, demanding to know why her grandchildren were left under a false arrangement while Jessica rested at home. The argument erupted so loudly that Ryan messaged me, "Hope you're enjoying the spectacle you ignited." I didn't reply. Silence had evolved into my native tongue. Second, my mother's reputation absorbed a blow she never anticipated. For years she'd been the sage grandmother, the community pillar relatives consulted for unity advice. But the screenshot of her note reoriented how people heard her voice. Sophie has no other obligations. Those 5 words travelled further than any speech I could have delivered. Aunt Linda left a tearful voicemail. Melissa reported that cousins were swapping stories, recognizing my mother had orchestrated similar manipulations with others, assigning labour, rewriting consent, wielding guilt like a scheduling tool. At the subsequent church potluck, someone innocently asked if she'd resolved that childcare confusion, and according to Melissa, Mom departed early with a sudden headache. Third, Ryan and Jessica were forced to inhabit the life they'd persistently outsourced. With the centre monitoring their paperwork and relatives suddenly wary of being volunteered, they had to hire genuine assistance. The price stunned them. Ryan axed a golf weekend. Jessica unloaded the designer stroller she'd purchased for baby 5, posting that priorities shift when family support vanishes. I nearly retorted, family support didn't vanish, unpaid labor resigned. I didn't send it. Growth sometimes means letting the sharpest reply dissolve unspoken. 6 months after the newborn arrived, Ryan texted me a single photo, no caption. A beautiful, healthy, utterly blameless baby boy. I stared at the image for a long while, love and grief coexisting inside a single breath. I responded, he's gorgeous, congratulations. He replied, do you want to meet him? I recognized what that question used to encode. Are you ready to be useful again? So I replied carefully, I would love to meet him as his aunt. I'm not available for childcare. 2 days of silence, then one word, fine, not an apology but a border. I visited on a Sunday afternoon with James waiting nearby at a bookstore because I still didn't fully trust the environment. The house was chaos, laundry draped over couches, bottles stacked by the sink, Ella helping Lily with a shoe, Oliver glued to deafening cartoons. Jessica looked depleted, Ryan looked older. Mom was there cradling the baby, but for the first time she didn't hand him to me with instructions. She asked stiffly, would you like to hold him? Asked. That word mattered enormously. I said yes, the baby nestled warm and impossibly tiny against my chest. In that quiet moment, Ella crawled beside me and whispered, Mom says grown-ups have to ask now. My eyes strung, but I smiled. That's a very good rule. Later in the kitchen, Jessica surprised me. I'm sorry for what I said at the barbecue about training. I searched her face for hidden hooks and ulterior invoice. I found none. Thank you, it hurt. She nodded. I know. Ryan never apologized. Dad never apologized. Mom once edged closest with I suppose I assumed too much. The narrowest admission imaginable, yet it confirmed the old pattern could never resume in its previous form. That's the detail people often miss about revenge. The most fulfilling version isn't always witnessing someone's collapse. Sometimes it's watching them learn that access to you carries conditions. I didn't turn icy. I turned unmistakably clear. I kept loving the children. Birthday parcels, school plays when invited, visits chosen freely and ended when I needed. I never again shouldered a responsibility simply because someone laid it at my shoes. The group chat shifted too. Requests for help began to feature words like, would you be available? And are you willing? It was almost comical how revolutionary consent sounded inside a family that had sermonized about love for decades. 1 year after the center incident, I moved into a condo I bought myself, not extravagant but mine. On my first evening, I sat cross-legged among half-opened boxes with takeout noodles and pulled out the folder marked Family Boundary Documentation. I expected bitterness. Instead, I felt profound gratitude for the woman who'd been terrified and acted anyway. The woman who answered Officer Daniels' call and chose truth over comfort. The woman who faced 3 frightened children and refused to let affection be twisted into a leash. I archived the folder, didn't delete it. Some lessons deserved to stay reachable. Then I powered off my phone and slept more peacefully than I had in years. So if you're listening and you're the reliable one, the single one, the child-free one, the quiet one praised only when you're useful, hear this clearly. Your existence is not surplus time for other people's emergencies. Your affection is not consent. Your guilt is not a binding contract. Authentic family doesn't need to trap you in order to hold you near. Comment below with what you would have done if your own family tried to reframe your boundaries as abandonment. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe to Late Night Drama Stories so these narratives can reach the next person who needs them. We trust this tale gave you both heart and a lesson worth keeping. Just a gentle note, this video is wholly fictional and designed for entertainment, education and reflection. If you carry away one insight, let it be this. Exiting a toxic environment may ache initially, but remaining where you're persistently devalued can wound you far more deeply.